Hello, students, and welcome to part one of the Renewable Energy lecture series. Part one today is going to be on energy efficiency and a little bit about our electric grid. All right, so energy units, you probably have seen these before, but power is energy divided by time, otherwise known as, you can also represent it as work divided by time, and we measure that in watts. Energy, then, you can rearrange the equation and energy will be equal to power times time, and that unit would be a watt hour. And that sounds strange, but your electric bills actually come in the units of something called a kilowatt hour. So what that means is that it's the number of watts, kilowatts your house uses times the number of hours that you are using those kilowatts. If you're going to scale it up then to like a power plant or amount of energy a whole town might use, you'd be looking at megawatts. And if you're going to be looking at what countries would use, you're looking at gigawatts. And in the case of the United States, we're probably up in the terawatt range. So a joule is another common energy unit that you'll often see reported also. And that's what we use, of course, in physics classes. All right, so energy efficiency, this is really huge because as we start looking towards solutions, and your assignment for this unit is going to be looking at energy uses and potential solutions, energy efficiency is like the low-hanging fruit. Can we actually, rather than building new power plants or replacing old fossil fuel plants with new renewable power plants, can we just reduce the amount of energy we use by becoming more efficient? So when you look at the kinds of things like the internal combustion engine, look at how much is actually wasted in that engine. It's over 100 years old and we're still using it. When you think about the old style incandescent light bulbs, 95% of the electricity that you're using, that energy, goes to heat rather than light. So fluorescents do 4 times better, but they're still wasting almost 80% of the electricity. So step it up even more and you go to LEDs and you save even more energy. So, and all of this is due to that second law of thermodynamics, that whenever you use energy of some sort, some of it's transferred to a less useful form. And nearly always that less useful form is heat. So just, those old incandescent light bulbs, you could actually bake cakes with them in your easy bake oven. So as you go upwards then from, say, a 60-watt light bulb, you can get about 4 times more efficient with a fluorescent light, but you're actually 6 times more efficient if you go to LEDs. And so over the years, when I first moved into my house, had a lot of overhead lighting with old incandescents. I've been replacing those with fluorescents. And now some of those fluorescents are starting to burn out, and I've been replacing them with LEDs. And I've watched my electricity bill go down as a result. So just, if 1.2 million households replaced just one 60-watt incandescent light bulb, you could actually save that much electricity, which would be enough energy to power 7,000 homes. So really, if we have the technology, why would we not become more energy efficient? All right, so this is a little graphic from Miller, which I'm not super fond of, but I like it for one reason. And it talks about whenever you're going to be using energy, you're going to have a certain amount of waste, and there's no way you're ever going to become 100% efficient. But this 43% says down here, it's unnecessarily wasted. So what could we do to reduce? This is the number that we could target. And imagine if we were able to save 43% of our electricity usage by getting rid of that unnecessary waste. And I don't know where Miller gets that number from, but just even if it's not 43%, it's going to be a fairly large number. All right, so this is another graphic from Miller that just shows, if you're going to be talking about uranium and nuclear power plants, they're carbon free, but the whole process from mining the uranium all the way down to when you finally get that electricity into your household, every step along the way is going to have waste heat. And so that reduces your net energy efficiency. And your net energy efficiency is defined as the entire energy of delivery process, all of the energy it takes to get that that electricity into your house. What do you get out of that? So, the original power that you might think you might get out of something, what's lost with all of those losses of heat along the way? If you just pipe sunlight right into your house through windows, you only lose about 10% of it. So just, if we can start looking at more of that passive idea, passive solar, we could actually increase our efficiency. All right, so what are some other ideas? There's something called cogeneration, which I think is really cool. And that is, if you're going to have waste heat, instead of just like letting it off into the air or into the cooling systems, like water, you could actually try to harness that and maybe heat your system at your power plant or have it run your air conditioning systems or run other kinds of processes. So again, it's not going to be as useful in energy as, say, the gas coming into the city plant. This is taking an example of a natural gas plant and using that waste heat, but you could still use it. So, you know, waste heat there's other ways to do cogeneration in the wastewater treatment plant. There are the microbes that they use to break down the waste, let off methane as part of that waste process. They capture that and they pipe it back into the natural gas systems. And so when you turn on your stove at your house, some of that gas might have actually come from a wastewater treatment plant. It's not cogeneration as far as two types of energy, but it's a way of using a byproduct for instead of letting it just go to waste. So other ways to improve your energy efficiency: better insulate your homes, you know, better windows, roofs, etc. Use those energy efficient lighting and appliances. For years, decades, our appliances, no one ever worried about how much electricity they were using even when they were turned off. So now we're looking at those things. And then, you know, of course, looking at our cars and how can we replace our fossil fuel driven engines with better cars. All right, so this is just kind of a busy graphic, but realize you could actually go through, and there's energy audits that there are people from the energy company are sometimes willing to come to your house and do a free energy audit and say, look, if you replaced your roof, if you replaced your windows, if you got energy efficient appliances, this is actually looking at it from an economic perspective. How much money could you save on your electricity bill if you could make in your heating bill, if you could make your house more energy efficient? All right, so this is looking at cars and looking at different countries and the targets that we had. What kind of fuel efficiency do we want our cars to have? The EU has said by 2030, European Union, that they want 76.3 miles per gallon. Of course, they don't measure it in miles per gallon, but you know, in equivalent, that's huge. Right now, most cars, my car gets about 28 miles per gallon. The US said by 2025, they want it to be 55 miles per gallon. The Trump administration has gotten rid of that. California says they're still moving forward with that. And right now that is like tied up in potential litigation lawsuits. There's kind of a tug of war going on between California saying we should be able to set our own fuel efficiency standards. That goes back decades. And the current administration saying, no, the federal government gets to set the standards. States can't set their own. So I don't know what the status of this is going to be down the road. Partly that's going to be due, you know, with our next presidential election. All right, and then one thing that is good is we have made more efficient cars over the years. And so early on in the 70s, we had these huge gas guzzling cars. They weren't, for the most part, weren't SUVs. This was mostly the light trucks, not the SUVs. This big bulge you see here is when SUVs became popular. But you can see that even without new CAFE standards, et cetera, that cars have actually gotten more efficient over time. We're getting better at making the engines and whatnot. So we have seen our CO2 emissions go down, because if you're going to use less gas, improve your gas mileage, you're going to put less CO2 into the atmosphere. All right, and you've seen this one before, but just our 2014 electricity generation by type, and that coal is dropping. The 2019 or 2018 coal generation, you know, I believe is down, maybe it's close to a 31% now. So that is good. What's replacing it is natural gas and those renewables. All right, so this graphic kind of shows that renewables are increasing rapidly. This is just a one-year change in renewables from 2013 to 2014, and that unit is a gigawatt hour. So we're talking a whole lot of power, a whole lot of energy. And if you look, just the year-over-year change in wind, solar, biomass, et cetera, it's really jumped. Hydroelectric came down because actually out here in the West, we're actually starting to take out some of those hydro dams to try to protect salmon and increase, you know, not have salmon go extinct. But for everything else, if you look at it, there's a pretty good rise in renewables. And this to me is really heartening, especially this is just a one-year change. All right, so, and as we look at it nationwide, NPR had an article where they actually showed every state and the United States in general, how is our energy mix changing? For the United States in general, from 2004 to 2014, in that one decade, coal dropped by 11%. And what replaced it was mostly natural gas, but also renewables. For Washington State, again, our hydro went down a little bit as we've taken out a few of our dams that created hydropower, but also coal has gone down and our renewables have gone up. So this is good news. All right, so looking in general at the United States, all of our energy, about 71% from fossil fuels, and a lot of that's because our transportation is still largely driven by oil. But the other thing that we need to think about is that compared to where we were, and if you look at the wall behind me, you will see a picture of my house when it was first built in 1958. Your average 1950s household used just a fraction of the energy that households do now. And I know that because when I bought this house, it still had a 1950s electric panel and only 4 circuits to run the whole house. The house inspector actually laughed when he saw my panel, and I said, "What?" And he goes, you have enough electricity to have like maybe 1 TV set, but don't turn on any 2 appliances at the same time. You're going to start blowing circuits." So in order to, he goes, "You do not have a household that's set up for a 2010, which is the year I bought it, household." So if you look at our electricity, people these days have multiple phones, computers, multiple TV sets in every room, microwaves, all these things that didn't exist in the 1950s. Or 1940s, where you see that data now exist. And so I've literally tripled my electricity. I've got triple the number of circuits that I had when I first moved in this house in 2010. All right, and I'm just a household of 2. So our nation's electric bill is it's huge. And again, we're very much a digital society now, so our demand for electricity is pretty large. All right, and just so you can kind of see, just comparison between a city like Seattle and your average residential customer uses this many kilowatt hours per person versus the east side suburbs, of which Mercer Island is part, quite a bit more. And I think a lot of that is difference between more apartment dwellers in Seattle, more homeowners in the suburbs. And on top of that, your houses in Seattle are just overall smaller than your houses in the suburbs. A lot of the houses in Seattle were built in the 1930s, 1940s, my house in the 1950s, and they're not big houses. So the suburbs were built later when houses tended to be built bigger. All right, so just for your sources, I just wanted to show you, and this would never be on the AP test, but your Puget Sound electricity source, they're actually made a goal of replacing their fossil fuels with renewables. So when you cross over the mountains and you see those cool wind turbines and you can actually pull off and look at it, that is electricity that's going to your house. So think of the infrastructure. There's also a little solar plant right there. And think of the infrastructure. That electricity is generated in Eastern Washington. They've got to pipe it across the mountains to your house on Mercer Island. So this is the current breakdown. But again, that's changing. Their goal is to open up more and more of these things. We can't build wind turbines in our part of the state because it's not very windy here. But as you come out of the Cascade Mountains, it gets pretty windy. In fact, anytime you're downwind of mountains, you're going to get pretty windy. So as we evaluate wind power in one of the later lectures, you'll see the good places for it are often downwind of the Rocky Mountains. All right, so Seattle City Light, this is my electricity utility. We're only about 4% fossil fuel. We got just a little bit from coal, landfill gas, and anyway, there's just, we're very small, and it's not because we're a better electric utility, it's that we bought up most of the hydropower in the state. So we have it in not Puget Sound Energy. There's only a certain amount of hydropower to go around. All right, so let's talk about the grid a little bit because this is important. I've been pushing the infrastructure story with you guys all year. Infrastructure with electric grid is part of the same problem. We have increasing demand. We have about 10,000 power plants, and they're really not efficient because most of them are really old. And we never thought about efficiency. We never cared when energy was plentiful and cheap, and we didn't know climate change was a thing. Now we do, and they're also, as things get older, they get more inefficient. All right, so new power plants can actually be a whole lot more efficient, but it's really expensive to build new power plants. They can put in cogeneration, all kinds of neat stuff, but it's really expensive to build new power plants. We also have other issues. Who wants a power plant next to their house? Other inefficiencies we have is that we have all of these high voltage, these transmission lines that carry the electricity to your homes. And first off, when we transport them long distances, when you see these big power lines that tend to cross mountains and whatnot, that's really high voltage stuff. You do not want to be touching that, and you don't want that coming into your house. So in order to carry this safely into your house, first it comes out of the plant. They have to step it up to that high voltage so they can transmit it long distances. And then before they bring it into your house, they have to step it back down. Each one of those steps wastes a certain amount of electricity. Just transmitting electricity along a wire for long distances wastes electricity. So this is a really kind of inefficient process. So transmission and distribution losses, they increased partly because our grid is getting more use and it's getting congested. But also, again, it's pretty old. Our infrastructure is pretty old. So everyone's like, why do we have these this is ugly, these above ground lines? Why do we have those? Why don't we just bury the lines? It's also more efficient. There's some problems with that though. When there's a windstorm and a tree takes out a power line, you can point to that broken power line and say, hey, come fix it, get my electricity back. Now imagine those power lines are underground and a tree root takes one of them out. How do you find it? You know, like, and so you'd have to have little sensors all along your line so that you could try to hone in on where that break is. But then in order to fix it, you'd have to dig up people's streets, people's yards. It's just would be, so there's some real issues with underground transmission lines too. I'm not saying that it's a terrible idea and we shouldn't use them. I'm just saying that realize they're not the best. There's issues. All right, so let's go back to this idea. We need more power. Our demand has increased by 25%. Think of cell phones. 1990, pretty much people didn't have them. Cell phones, laptops, all those electronics. All right, so, but we've actually decreased our construction of new lines. We've decreased construction by 30%. So now we have congestion. And when there's congestion, you can not get the power where it needs to go. One of the biggest issues with electricity infrastructure is that you can't save the electricity. We have more hydropower in the spring in Seattle than we know what to do with. We actually just have to let the water go, or we have to pipe it off somewhere else. We cannot save electricity. We don't have the battery power to save electricity from a whole power plant. The Tesla Powerwall is now barely able to get you enough electricity battery power to like run your house, but it's marginal. Battery technology still has a long way to go. So we have to move electricity around as we need it. So we have hydropower here in the spring, but by fall, we have to pipe in our electricity from somewhere else because our water is running really low by fall. All right, so we have outages related to all of this inefficiency in places like Los Angeles in the summertime when they have a huge demand for air conditioning. They sometimes run out of power and they have to have blackouts, and they roll them so that no one area has a blackout for too long, but they might have to like shut down electricity in certain areas for parts of the day and change which areas those are in order to keep the electricity flowing. This is different than the shutdowns they had due to wildfires and winds this last year. All right, so anyway, construction new facilities. People don't want power plants next to their houses for understandable reasons, you know, even though they need that electricity. And so there's litigation, people trying to keep these things going up near where they live. And so our aging infrastructure versus the increased demand is just a problem that's growing rather than shrinking. So that is the end of the first energy lecture, and I'll get started with the next energy lecture coming up.